This week on Filthy Hope.
Mary used to be painted on the moon because she was the mother of Jesus. Now, Jesus being the light of the world, and the moon was also the light, but it was a lesser light. And so they would paint Mary on the moon as being that light space. But then all of a sudden they realized that the moon doesn't shed light at all. It actually reflects the light of the sun. And so this whole movement happened where the church was the one an artist came and painted Mary on the moon, but painted craters on the moon. And it was the first time where art actually evoked the fact that science has said that it's not a light source in itself. And the church excommunicated that artist and the scientist, which over many years of time, I'm sure they didn't rock up on a Sunday and be like, you're out. It evoked a theological shift. It challenged things. And for me, how cool is that? The church actually was the leading forefront of actually saying something really cool. But also, how bad is it that the church had so much power that they then could say, and you're wrong.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Filthy Hope. If it's your first time here, welcome. We're so glad you could join us. On this show, we spend time in the grey spaces where Jesus, life and culture intersect. And today I'm joined by a very special guest, Kelly Woods. Welcome to the show.
Yay, thank you so much. It's so good to be on this end of your podcast because usually I'm on the other end. So it's nice.
Yeah, and people that have listened to previous episodes with myself and Odrev could possibly then have also jumped over and seen us on Odd Sonder as well. So I feel like we're finally triangulating a little,
yes,
some threads that are finally connecting. So it's good to sit down and chat.
Yeah, definitely. It's nice because we played in each other's circles a bit, so it's nice to actually get them to marry up a bit as well. So
yeah. So maybe we'll start by introducing you to our audience. Maybe just tell us a little bit about, what do you do and what do you get up to on your day-to-day and what's your place in the grand scheme of things? It's a very existential question to start with, I know.
I know, existentially. No, it's good. So for those who know me in real life, which is really everything, I'm Kelly Woods. I used to be Kelly Stilton, but I got married, which is exciting. And
congratulations.
Thank you. And my online world space is Pastoral Hare. So that is who I am. To cross over all of them, I have green hair in all aspects. That might be more helpful for those who are visually inclined. My day-to-day life, I work for the Uniting Church, and I know that's a common thread with Odrev and also you too, Jonty. And yes, I work down for the Victorian and Tasmanian Synod, and I look after our younger generation's new and digital communities. So my title could not be any longer. But yes, that's what I do. And I hang out in the digital space and world on my days off. And I also love art and creativity and crocheting, embroidery, and all that kind of jazz. So you'll find me hanging out in lots of different spaces.
Awesome. And so Odd Sonder is a part of that kind of tapestry, I'm guessing, of the digital spaces. Maybe just tell us a little bit more about your role and what that kind of looks like and where Odd Sonder fits in with that.
Yeah, sure. So Odd Sonder actually came about, of course, in the COVID pandemic at the beginnings. But we were hanging out and doing online ministry, part of Sonderverse, which used to be called Sonder Collective. And we did an online region before COVID even hit. So Odrev and I were hanging out in the online space. So when COVID hit, we're like, guys, we're already here, jump in and hang out with us. We have a region online. That developed and shifted. And so one thing that Odrev and I wanted to do was to hang out and have a podcasting but stream kind of discussion space to invite people in to do exactly this, hanging out in the grey spaces, finding the intersections of, faith and culture and sci-fi and that kind of stuff. And so we settled on the name Odd Sonder because Will is Odd Rev, And then I had not yet settled on what my name was, and so we came with Sonda. And so Odd Sonda is a marrying of our two little nuggets, but it sits into the bigger tapestry of the Sondaverse. So we have gaming spaces for people to connect and chill and hang out in. So if you are a naturally inclined gamer, then this is a safe community for you to come and hang out with. We're deconstruction friendly, we're completely affirming. We actively are trying to decolonize our theologies, which is so hard. Odd Rev and I find as two white people. Even though both of us are second generation Australian, we find it so difficult to really break apart that whiteness that we have in our theology. But we are on that journey. And yeah, so that's that space. How it fits into the bigger tapestry is that when I started for the new and digital communities position, the synod, I said, I would love to do this position. Like, what an exciting opportunity. Um, However, I can't divorce myself from actually doing new communities and digital communities. So if you allow me to be in this position, I'm actually still going to be doing the work on the ground because I love it. Like, that's why I want this position. I want to help people do what, you do all the time, Jonty, we do all the time, and actually help get that more of a catalyst space. So it connects in because it runs adjacently, but it's my job. It's what I help people form and start and do.
Mm. I'm curious to hear from you as well in your experience with digital communities. There's obviously some overlap there in how community works in person versus digitally, but there's also ways that they're very different.
Yes.
I guess, in your experience, what are the benefits? What are the things that you can do digitally with community that are opportunities that you aren't able to do physically?
Yes. So I was just quickly bringing up one of my screens that I always share with people because one of my big things was when I started, I asked the question, what gives someone a sense of community? Because how often we hear that this isn't real, virtual isn't real, and I know that you guys have been discussing that in the previous few weeks
Mm.
on your potty. Um, but the thing is, like, this is community and we hang out and gather. So the 4 points, this was developed by a guy called, or someone, Sorensen, but it was developed by those who did our well-being sector when we were moving from trying to include individuals who might be sitting at the edges of society, whether it's mental health struggles or things where people didn't want them to be functioning in regular society, which is terrible, and actually bringing that into the well-being sector and allowing for a fully functioning society with everybody included. So it's the very basis of our social welfare network. So it was developed before the internet even started. And I love that because the 4 points of a sense of community are membership, influence, integration and a fulfillment of one's needs, and shared emotional connection. And for me, I sit there and go, that happens in person or online. It does not matter. Those four things can be found in all of them. And for those who are more online inclined, they're not different for us. Like, if someone might be in the world and functioning without the needs of, digital electronics, I'd be curious to where they were because they have them everywhere now. But yeah, they might not find that sense of fulfillment of needs when they come on in the online space. But if we're digital natives, it is a fulfilling space. We can hang out here. And to answer that question that you asked, like, what are the benefits? There's all this research that's actually been done, particularly people from our queer community. So I'm a part of the queer community as well. When we hang out in our online space, particularly talking about faith and religion, we can actually be more open and more at peace and more at a sense of who we are online. Rather than going into a church building or going into a physical room with people. The online space allows us to actually unmask more and be more comfortable. And I'm like, great, for me, I'm saying yes, all for that, because then people can actually be who they are. Tick. So
Yeah,
that's one
cool.
place.
I guess that goes to kind of my next question, which, because there are obviously lots of places in the world where the gospel is often kind of met with a bit of hostility, or at the very least, like skepticism, and
Yes,
rightfully so. Some
of course.
skepticism, and it's interesting to see the dynamic between when that happens, like in the. I actually caught myself about to say in the real world, but
Oh,
like
I do it too.
physically, you know, there was really funny but also kind of informative story that Odrev was sharing with me a few weeks ago about being at PAX wearing his
Yes.
dog collar, and the way that physical interaction between the gospel and faith, and a very obviously faith-centric person interacting with people in a more secular
Yep.
space. Is there a sense in that, like, in an online space, you kind of get to bypass some of that animosity and get straight to, like, is it more? Are you
Yeah.
able to kind of get straight to conversation number 3 almost, and kind of bypass some of that initial friction?
Yeah, I think in a way, yes and no. I know that uh, in our streams, whether it's we've been gaming or in our odd Sonder conversation space, we actually, Jonty, you were there a couple of weeks ago.
Mm.
You were part of the conversation when our thread blows up and people, it's a personal space for them, so they get really, really fired up and reflect on that, and that comes forward in our streams all the time. So we don't bypass the religious angst at all. It's there. I think what's helpful is the fact that because we're creating a third area. So where when we meet in the physical space, like let's just say you and I were in a physical room at the moment, John T. Your physical space and my physical space, and where we interact with one another is all the same area. And so it all is consolidated. But purely by introducing the digital space, we've now separated that. So you have your physical space, I have my physical space, and then we have our common space, which is our online world. That separation allows for people to come with more ease before they angst into something. Yeah, so I don't think that we necessarily bypass the non-religiousness, but particularly in streams, I don't know if you have it with podcasts because it is more of an audio-based thing. When people look at me physically, like I am a young woman with green hair, like they're already like curious, and I was like, yeah, we're not cookie cutter. Let me break open a reality that religion is not what the movies tell us. Religion is
Mm.
not what um, even less, even American politics and theology tell us. Like religion is more diverse than that. And if I can even let you be curious for 2 seconds, like, can you imagine what that might be for you to explore what it's like in your world? So,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point as well. I've been reading about I can't remember whose idea this is. I'd have to Google it, but this idea of third spaces,
Mm-hmm.
um, which
Third space
aren't,
theology.
yeah, they aren't the home, they aren't our workplace. They're
It's a coffee shop.
and it like a coffee shop, and that's something that churches, like one of the really valuable social assets that church
Yes.
provides people is a third space. And I think what's really wonderful about what you guys are doing, and what we're attempting to do as well with what we're doing, is
Yes.
not physically but providing a third space in the same way that churches do. And there's this really interesting
Absolutely.
again, I'm a terrible philosopher because I can never remember any of the
Me neither.
any of the dead old white people that I'm referring to. But there's this there's this idea of the non-space that
Oh
has
yeah.
or the non-place that has kind of come up in the last 50 years with late stage capitalism, where it's places like airports and train stations, and now more and more coffee shops and public places that are transitory, that no one
Yes.
actually stops and
The
spends time in.
liminal.
Liminal. You don't go to an airport to spend time in an airport. You go to an airport to go somewhere else. And
You know,
there's this,
oh,
yeah. I don't
it's
know. And
funny.
you go.
Sorry, I was
No, no,
only
no.
because I. It's funny that you said this. 2 weeks ago, I was traveling for work, so we went down to Tasmania, came back, and myself and my work colleague had flights that were an hour apart from each other,
Mm,
and so we're in the one car. So I was left sitting at the airport for an hour waiting for her to come back, which is so fine. But then her flight was delayed, so then I was like, oh my goodness. So I was still sitting at the airport, so fine. But it got me
mm,
thinking. the conversations I had there. I helped a mum whose second language was English find, I don't even know what her first language is. I helped her find her daughter because she was trying to communicate by the telephone. And so we're pointing and helping form that conversation. And then I ran into a whole bunch of people because I was crocheting. They were like, what are you making? I do this. This lady like opened her suitcase, showed me all these creations that she's been doing. And I genuinely, when my work colleague came back, I was like, man, I should sit at the airport more often and be like an airport chaplain. And I had to laugh because it's exactly this space. Like people, the need to what's that word I'm trying to say? Transition. To transition from one place to the other, we forget that transition, and this is totally coming from someone who is neurodiverse. We forget about the transition all the time. Like we actually need that middle ground. And I wonder if that's people are forgetting that middle ground holds goodness. So digital communication is not just about getting information from one place to the other, which is exactly how it was formed and how it was brought forward. But now you can actually sit in that middle. You can sit in the liminal and be there. So I really love that. I'm going to look up that random philosopher that you can't remember, who I don't know, and see if we can find them. So.
Yeah, because to me it's a really interesting idea, and that the writer who started, or I guess first kind of coined this idea, was talking about it in a way that in a negative connotation, that like it's a place that becomes void of human connection, and like you don't drop roots in non-spaces, and there are more and more non-spaces in the world. But I actually think, when I think more about it, that like particularly in the digital world, there are so many places that if you're so inclined can just become transitory, but actually there's room inside that, and this is, I think, part of what both of us are trying to achieve with what we do, is providing spaces that otherwise would be transitory, to actually form human connections and start conversations, and in a way that isn't just leave a comment and then never talk to that person ever again. Because you can do that. That's the other tricky thing with social media and digital communication, is that like it's a little bit like, I was thinking about this the other day, like when you're driving in a car, for some reason, because you've got two panes of glass between you and the other person, we sometimes feel like we're able to just shout the most horrendous things because we're immune. Whereas, like, if you're standing next to them in an elevator,
I wouldn't say that.
never shout the things that you say in the car. And I think social media is a little bit the same, because we have that, like, 2 degrees of separation between the screens.
Yeah.
It's that transitory thing. I can say whatever I want because I'm never going to interact with this person ever again. I get it, long-winded non-question, but, like, how do you see, like, where are the spaces that we can start to not fight against that, but be a little bit more prone to human connection in these places? Like, the live streams are an amazing thing, but you know,
they are.
We're in a new frontier, I feel like, in this way.
I love how you've touched on so many threads of where I could go with this conversation, because one thing is, you said we don't have roots, and for those who know me in the real world, I have a deep love of moss. I love moss. And I know I'm not the only one. There is a whole Moss Appreciation Society, like Facebook group. It's got thousands and thousands of members. So go find it. Enjoy my life. It's amazing. But what I love about moss is that it doesn't have a root system. And tangibly with that is the opposite with fungus, like mushrooms, where they have an entire connected root system underground. And so when you are seeing one mushroom spore pop up, it's actually just the mushroom in that place. It's not disconnected from everything else. It's all connected. And for me, I love those 2 images to help us explore more what we mean by, like, being authentic, being able to be connected. How do we find these spaces? What does it look like? And the other thread that I'd love to take in that, I'm really excited. I don't know if other people have heard, so I'm going to drop it here. But Karina Kaminsky, who is also New South Wales ACT United Church Space, and Armin have started. I'm sorry, Armin, I can't remember your last name. It starts with G, but I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. Both of them have begun a group called At the Edges, which is a narrative reflective writing group to talk about where we're seeing these spaces form, and how we write about it. And I'm really blessed and lucky to have been asked to contribute to it, so I'm pumped. But what I'm actually going to be writing on is space making, which is exactly this topic. It's not a new thought to us about where we create spaces, because it's chaplaincy ministry. Like, places already exist. We're just going in and opening them up for space to flourish and to grow. And I think that's the big thing that we at least are taking in the digital space. We don't, as Odd Rev always puts so beautifully, we don't want to come here and colonize this space. Like, the digital realm has existed. It has people hanging out in it. We are being people who have hung out in this space and found goodness as it is. We don't want to come in and take over. We want to be able to come in and actually flourish and create space to do that meaning-making conversation, to break down those two panes of glass, to actually say, like, who am I here is deeply authentic to who I am wherever you're going to find me. And I find that really powerful and a challenge for a lot of people, because they think that we can be disingenuous behind a screen. When for me, I'm hoping that I'm seeing this as a window, that people can actually see the authenticity behind who we are. And I think that's a challenge in the digital space, when you are, tempted with the keyboard to be able to type whatever you want. I think sometimes when I get really angry, I type what I want to on the keyboard, and then I go, oh, and then I never post it, and I just carry on, because it's almost like cathartic need to like just get it out and then go, cool, and carry on, because we don't know the complexities of people's stories behind the screen. And I don't want to be that one person that pushes them over the edge. And similarly, they don't know my life. They don't know my experiences that have come with it. So we have to hold that tension of being deeply authentic, while also acknowledging that in that authenticity, we're only one little mushroom spore. We have no idea of the connections underground for that. And to be authentic to that means acknowledging we could deeply damage someone by the comments we say or the words that we share. And what would it mean to then flip that, to bring that into our personal life more, and to have that deep experience? So how does our digital world help us learn to interact more personally with one another? So, yeah, I could go many threads.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting though, that because I don't think I've heard many people talk about that, linking back into the physical world of using digital spaces as a way of almost the positive things that we can get out of interacting in a digital space, taking that and referring that back to the physical world, and how we embody that with the people around us. That's a really interesting thought. I haven't actually thought about that before. Do you have more that you could speak on about that?
I know that it's sometimes phrased as like gamifying, like how do you gamify a scenario?
I did a whole 6 months at uni on gamification. That was a big buzzword,
gamification. And so that's a great example of how we use it. So I hang out with Odd Rev like multiple times a week. So of course they're going to be hanging out in this conversation a fair bit, but we laugh at how like something like our U Foods or not U Foods, sorry, they bring you perfectly stout fresh meals that you can just open right away. You can sponsor. But more like Hello Fresh, like, and your Marley spoons, like the ones that come with the sections. And we laugh because it's a game. It's like, this is your end goal. Here are all your pieces. Like, you have to get these pieces to look like this before you can level up and enjoy your meal. And we do these things all the time. And I think people might feel that it's a negative. Like, are we letting this speak too much into our existence? Where culture begets culture. Like, and we are now in the space of a digital culture. It's been here for a long time. It's been hanging out, particularly for the church world. We're just really far behind. Like, where the rest of the world have been like figuring out how to create complete ecosystems of engagement and connection and community here, we have people figuring out how to turn computers on. And that's not trying to say it's a bad thing. That's just a need for us in the religious space to realize that we actually are not leading anything here. We have to be the followers. And that's very scary for a church world, particularly one that's had control over the population for a long time, in the broadest sense of what that word means. And so it's scary when we ask the question, what can this teach us about our own life? And for me, it's like, well, here it's allowing us to pick up on different sensory needs. It's allowing us to understand, like, you know, Odd Rebel would always talk about, like, you know, we have to be face to face. It's like, at the moment, Jonty, you and I are the most face to face that we can possibly be. I have no other ability. Like, I'm just seeing your face on my screen. Like, it is deeply in, like, we're here. You know, we highlight different areas of, like, I suppose, sorry, what I'm trying to say is it probably gives us more of a magnifying glass into very specific areas that when we then bring that back into a non-digital realm, all of a sudden it allows us to see different areas of a prism and turn it differently. So yeah, I don't know if that helps answer that. That gives a plethora. So we've got gamification and more of our sensory needs. And you might have to get me thinking about other spaces, because I know that, you know, one good example is, you know, for those on Twitch, our Twitch viewers, they would know that we raid, like when you finish a stream, it's good to raid another stream that's continuing to go. And so my reflection for the church on that is, when we're seeing that some churches are coming to end, a close, it's a reality. It's not bad. It is actually just what happens with communities. Like, people freak out about it. It's actually just ebb and flow. And when we then look to, I suppose, amalgamate them, I love my Christianese, join them together with another church, we would then look at a church that's viable, quote unquote, hate that word, but it's what we use. And what we're doing is we're actually raiding them. We're then sending all of these people to then go join in with that church and raid them to there. When we do that in the Twitch world, we don't look for a stream that's going to close in 15 minutes. We would look at a stream that's still streaming for hours and hours. And I think we could learn a lot from what that looks like when we then approach our church spaces, to actually then see how we're functioning in our digital world and how it can then translate back into our physical world. So there's another example.
Yeah. Something else that I'm thinking of is you briefly touched on neurodivergence and how being in an online space, to me, and also, like, I often think about how the church used to drive culture.
Oh, yeah.
Like whether it was scientific frontiers or music or art, like you look back through the centuries, and the church was at the forefront of driving those things, and we're just not anymore. And I actually wonder if the church actually is in a position now, with how much of a new frontier online spaces is, to actually drive culture around how we include and actually not cater for, but actually design spaces around being inclusive for all neurotypes. Is there? I'm assuming in your experiences with streaming and a few of those other things, I imagine this has come up. How do you respond to this idea that the church actually can push culture forward in how we engage with different neurodiversities?
Yeah, I think it's again that weird part where the church that you and I'm assuming your church growing up in now, the church for me that I grew up in, allowed me to actually realize the need of caring for one another, being good neighbor, you know, putting the needs of another first, and being in community with all plethora of people, whether they are, you know, the bee's knees of, you know, I grew up in a church with someone who was like the reigning reigning letters and numbers champion. So, like, cool. Well, I find that cool. I don't know. Many other people will have different opinions, but I'm like, that's wicked. Through to having people, particularly within our neurodiversity space, particularly people who might be nonverbal or who struggle with, I suppose, the social interactions day to day, and actually saying that's community, that's who we are. We all belong here, full stop. And so that's the church experience that I grew up in. The catch is that I've come to realize the church is not the forefront of that at all. And And that scared me because that is my experience of what I learned about caring and loving one another. We're all created in God's beautiful image. And that is, we hold that together. And so whether the church can lead that forefront in the digital world, I would actually first think the church needs to own it before we bring it to the digital space, because it's already happening there. Like, we already have, I know Odd Rev has spoken about the PAX experience. I don't know if it was mentioned on the podcast a few times because I didn't get the PAX. I didn't listen to the PAX episode, sorry. But we they spoke about how there's a panel, a mental health and pastoral care panel. Like, this stuff is happening already and people are caring about it. And I think that the question then lies, someone says, well, what's the purpose of the church then? If we now have sectors that care for people, it's taken away the church's job. When actually the church's job is always to care for the marginalised and oppressed of society. And how beautiful is it now that society is engaging with our neurodiversity needs, our deep community and needs for accessibility for all body and shape types and ability types. And how beautiful is it that, I can go to a movie cinema. So I have a walking stick some days, but I love it. I can go to a movie cinema and get there, and all of a sudden, like, they're like, no, it's ramps the whole way. Or if there's stairs to a particular room, I can just go in and it pulls me up the stairs. And the fact that I can then have subtitles, like, you can choose movies with subtitles kind of thing. And so it's made it so accessibly friendly. For me, I don't get that when I go to church buildings. Like, how many church buildings I've had to walk upstairs to and with my walking stick, and it's so painful, let alone for someone who might not be able-bodied to walk upstairs. We've just cut them completely out of connecting with anything. And so for the church to engage in this conversation, we have to first ask, like, our buildings are already telling us a story. And that story used to be inclusion and safety. And now that story is, like, completely devoid of what it means to connect and be with each other. And we don't realize that the bricks are yelling loud enough already. Like, we don't need to say anything. The bricks are telling us that. And yeah, I to touch on the art conversation, because, I can't help it. The church, like, used to be in that space of being that forefront of spiritual conversation and meaning making when it came to art and creativity and all of that. The truth is, we still are. The thing is, it's not the message that I think we want it to be heard. And I think that's the scary part. So for me, my question is, how do we reinvigorate the church's space to get it speaking of that meaning making, to get it to be ability to protest to what we're seeing happening rather than just being a part of the big system? Like, are we actually wanting this system to be this way? For me, no. Like, I think our system is deeply broken, and I want the church to be able to break that mold and be able to talk about it. But I don't know. I don't know if the buildings are ready yet. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't help that so many of our buildings were built in, like, the 70s and 80s.
Yep.
I can't remember who I was talking about this with, but, like, as an illustration, we don't expect, like, say, for example, people that use wheelchairs, right?
Yeah.
I think about my church building, it has a ramp that goes the long way around where the steps go down. So it actually takes longer. We don't then actually expect people that need to use that ramp, whether they're in a wheelchair or otherwise, to gradually wean themselves off the ramp to be able to use the stairs. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yes.
But I think sometimes with neurodiversity, we expect people to gradually wean themselves off the ramp to start using the stairs again. And actually, that's completely the wrong way of thinking about it.
Absolutely.
And we actually need to, generate systems and cultures and ways of doing church that are equally as accessible for all neurotypes in the same way that they're equally accessible for all different physical abilities as well.
I love that so much. I have never thought of it like that, but it's exactly what we try and do. It says, quote unquote, the normal function of walking up these huge flight of stairs to the door, and therefore you need to move to your quote unquote normal function. And It's such the reminder where, yes, of course, there's gifts that come with neurodiversity, but the gifts are the fact that we get to see different, and we get to see the world differently, and then we can echo back to the system saying, you're missing a whole thing. Like,
Yeah.
you're missing the goodness over here. So yes, there's a gift that comes with it, but we can't forget that neurodiversities do have a deeply disabling effect. And one of my favorite TikTokers, her name's Sounds of the Forest. And so she talks about, she cracked me up. I was laughing so much. She was saying, I'm so sick of people saying that my neurodiversity is a gift. She's like, it's like she sees herself sitting there amongst like Superman and Batman and Iron Man. It's like, I can turn invisible, I can run through walls, or I can, shoot lasers out of my hand. And she's like, I can tell you all the scientific facts to do with bugs for all of history. It's like, what? You're right. It's like when we say they're superpowers, we miss the fact that it's deeply disconnected from how our system has been set up. And so in our church world, like this idea that, oh, now everybody's being diagnosed with ADHD. It's like, actually, we're missing that. Like for me, I didn't have my diagnosis until I was 31 for my ADHD. And now looking back, I was like, do you guys see why I had no friends in high school at all? I had one friend, and they're still my friend. And now we've also recently discovered they also are on the neurodiverse spectrum. So we're like, when I wonder we became friends, that's it. I had a school of 2,000 people. I have a twin brother, like, my twin brother and my one friend, because I was like, guys, the system wasn't built for me to flourish. And I don't think people realize that for everyone to be able to flourish, we first have to stop creating this rhetoric that some of us are broken. And some of us feel that brokenness rhetoric by just existing. And what does it mean for the church to allow us to explore and all that? Not that I want neurotypicals to only come on board because it benefits them, but, there is proof that engaging with our sensory, in different sensory ways actually boosts our neuro pathways. So if you're engaging in playing with Play-Doh while preaching, which I love doing, I always bring Play-Doh to preach with, you're actually engaging and encountering God in a vastly different way than you might have ever engaged and encountered with God, purely because it's traveling to your neuro pathways differently. Like, that's cool. Like, that's really cool. So for me, that's the question of if we were to really take seriously that space, what we're trying to say is we're trying to expand how we experience God. And who doesn't and who shouldn't want to do that? Who shouldn't want to? Like, everyone should want to be able to experience God in the plethora of ways that others do. And some people might just experience it like that all the time.
Yeah. And I actually think, not to get too spicy, but like, I actually think a lot of the time when you hear, like, I spend a lot of time scrolling through social media on the Filthy Hope account to get an idea of, what, just the sort of stuff that's happening. And you spend long enough on there, you come across preachers railing against people who can't, like, pay attention.
I know.
And part of me goes like, well, maybe preach a better sermon. Like, maybe it's because you're stuck in your framework of how you understand the gospel.
Yes.
So that's how everyone else has to understand the gospel. And
Yes.
it's actually, I would say, if I'm going to, start to throw some rocks, which I know I shouldn't, but like,
I love
maybe you need to actually try a bit harder, and maybe it's a bit of lazy, maybe it is a bit of laziness in going, well, this is how I have learnt to preach 40 years ago, so that's the only way I'm going to preach, as opposed to going, who are the community that I'm preaching to? Who are the people that I'm caring for?
Absolutely.
What do they need? How do I best communicate to their needs?
The translation.
I think a lot of the stuff that I see online, you're just lazy. You don't want to do the work. You don't want to do the work to get to know your community, and you don't want to do the work to effectively care and communicate with them. And I don't know, it just drives me up the wall. And I actually saw a Instagram reel about a youth group pastor saying like that he only ever preached for a minute for every year that I'm not saying this very well, like however old the people were that he was preaching too,
Oh yeah,
that's how many minutes he would preach for. So like if he's preaching to a room full of 10-year-olds, 10
it's
minutes
10 minutes.
tops. Absolute tops. Get in and out because you're just not going to
Yeah,
hold them. And that's not the fault of the 10-year-olds. They're
no,
10-year-olds.
exactly.
And it's not, oh, the 10-year-olds need to, pay more attention to my 50-minute exegesis that I've worked on like it's the cure for cancer. No, shut up. You're just not preaching to the, like, you haven't understood the
Absolutely.
task,
And I think then it also then brings in our neurodiversities into that space. So I was trying to explain to, I can't remember who I was, I think it was my mum, bless her. She's an amazing woman. I love her so much. And I was trying to explain to her about cognitive dissonance, like, and executive dysfunction. And trying to explain, I was like, no, mum, you learn those when you grow up, neurotypical spaces, and also across the spectrum of neurodiversities. You grow in that when you're young. But for people who are, like for me, being ADHD, mine stopped. Mine stopped before. And so if we're then trying to, like at the time, of course, it's a great example, but like we then think that everyone should have leveled up in a particular stage with timing, where I'm like, actually, I still would benefit from the TikTok sermon. Like, not because it's a problem, but because, yeah, that's what actually engaged my brain a lot. But I love that rant in a sense that it's so true. Like, we've become lazy. And I actually pulled it up the other day. I have a rubrics. Anyone who knows me knows, one, I love the word rubrics, and two, I love them in general. But when I aim to preach a sermon, I try and, there's like, I don't know, good old Uniting Church. If you are a Uniting Church nerd, like a fair few of these listeners I'm sure would be, we have our Uniting in
Oh, yeah.
Worship 2, which is our green book. Love that thing. When you go in, you can read it, and it's got like little black triangles, which kind of insinuate these are what you must include in a sermon. Beautiful thing is we have ordered liberty, so we can bring those in any way that we can see it molding. And I think we forget that. We can shape and mold that for our communities when we listen to it and share. So things that you must include, like call to worship, scripture, all that kind of stuff. I then have a little other side of my rubrics, which then goes, is there something in the sermon, like in the whole worship service, that's visual? Do I touch on something about logic? Is there something about body? Like, are we actually doing our body movement or reflecting on a body part or whatever, how that integrates with us in a holistic way? Do we have music? Is there a word? Is there a verbal spoken part? Have I connected on the intersocial element of our life? And have I connected on the intra-self element of our life? Plus, then I've now started adding into that, because I wrote that, I was doing that ages ago. I added in like a sensory element. Like, are we touching on our sensory? What would it mean to bring in smells into this place? What would it mean to bring in, Play-Doh? How would it look to, take the different, even writing something down? We don't even have to think vast and hard. Like, we do this. And communion, we do it every communion Sunday. When you take communion, all of a sudden entering into a different sensory space. Do we figure out that that's actually how we learn? That's how we remember. So, yeah. I think you're right. We could do better. We could do better.
Yeah, try harder, people. It
Yes.
reminds me, I have to shout out the Rev at the church I go to, who's also been on the show, Rev Phil Swain. One of the best services I've been to in recent years was a Lent. I think it was actually the week before Easter this year, with different stations through the church building leading into the main room with the cross up the front. But it was around the story of the woman who uses the perfume, opens the perfume and puts it on his feet, and uses her hair to wash his feet. And each space had a different scent associated with a different part of the story, because the nature of the perfume that she had used, Jesus probably that scent would have stayed on him all the way up to his death on the cross.
Oh,
and he still would have
I
had
love
that smell throughout all the brutality and violence. And that's a really great example of using sensory experience as a way not only of engaging you, but actually engaging the story as well.
Absolutely. And we forget that. Like, I don't know if you guys sing in your church communities. We have a song, Like a Rose Trampled on the Ground. Like, it's a song I weep. Like, that hits me in all different levels. I don't know if it's just because of the music, like it's in a minor key, so it hits me differently. But it's like this idea of being a rose trampled on the ground. Like, that was like that's deeply a part of the biblical story of like when Jesus came down, they put palm leaves on the ground for the donkey to walk on, because it was the mimicry space as well of that when you had your, elites that entered from the other side of the town at that exact same day, they threw rose petals on the ground for the horse to trample on in order to ignite that perfume. And so this idea of sensory experience is not new. Like it is had been deeply used in ritual, in ceremony and stuff for thousands of years. And what would it mean to even break that open to look at beyond our Western Eurocentric culture? What are the smells and spaces and things that others have brought in order to help ignite memory or stuff? I know, shout out to Purple Pasta, who happens to also be part of our Odd Sonder crew. She is behind the scenes pretty much. She's our producer. She's incredible.
Legend.
So Purple Pasta loves sensory things. And one thing she keeps on talking about, and we need to make it, she wants to make a sense, like a scent nativity scene where we actually have the little jars and you can actually open it up and smell that person or smell. And I love that. But then I'm like, man, can you open up the donkey one? I was like, oh. Yeah. So, but yeah, so I think that would be really cool. Allow us to engage in the story vastly differently.
Mm.
Yeah.
I'd love to also talk about, we mentioned art earlier. And I often bemoan the fact that, like we said, like the church used to be, and I'm talking 1700s, 1800s, even sections of the 1900s even, used to drive culture around art, not for the sake of necessarily preaching the gospel or for any even like capitalist monetary gain, but for the sake of art. It's like that I always forget the name of the movie studio, the MGM, that with the lion that roars in the like their
I love
motto
the
is
stars come up.
Yeah, and their motto is art for art's sake. And
I love that.
The church used to be at the forefront of championing art for art's sake, because art reflects the beauty and creativity of our creator. And I look at where not just our uniting church movement, because that's a microcosm of the broader Western church movement, that just broadly, like when we do, it's horrible, like Christian movies that look like toothpaste commercials that are just horrendously bad.
If you have a bad day, you should go on Netflix and type in like Christian, and that's how I spend bad days, because it's terrible.
Yeah,
it's terrible. Anyway, yes.
But like that's kind of where we are, and that's an oversimplification. Like there's actually lots of really cool stuff going on in the world of music at the moment as well. There's a resurgence in a lot of like hip hop culture around in the Christian world as well. So I'm not trying to say that art is dead in the Christian world. It's certainly totally not. But like we live in this new digital age. I think that it's ripe for opportunity, not only for individuals but for the church to champion art, not for any like. And I think part of the reason so much Christian art, and I'm thinking particularly of movies here, part of the reason a lot of it sucks is because it feels like it has to self-actualize. It feels like the Christian movie has to convince you that Christianity is legit, as opposed to just like some of the best faith-based or Christian quote-unquote films that I've seen recently are things like First Reformed, that just act on the assumption that you're going to take the topic seriously without having to remind you the whole time.
I love that. Yep.
I don't know, like, and maybe for you, where does the digital kind of age sit in with this?
Yes.
Because it's a whole new canvas and a whole new, all different ways of expression. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I'm sure you have, because you're a movie connoisseur. Have you seen the movie Legion? It's like a scary
I actually
movie.
haven't. I know what it is, but I haven't seen it.
Okay. That gave me one of the most profound theological shifts. And I'm sure it's got like, it talks about demons and angels and stuff and things like that. And I'm not going to give it away. After you watch it, come find me again. Because I then was like, oh my goodness, I cannot hear the Christmas story the same way anymore. And what I love about that is I actually don't think it was the intended purpose of the movie. I
Mm.
think they went with like a little, a different adjacent thing. But I actually don't think, and if they did, good work on them for figuring out how to declare something so profound in such one way. And I think maybe the reason why Christian movies are so corny is because we forget that our movie, like the Christian narrative, is what has built a lot of our storytelling narrative, and that comes across from like our Greco-Roman culture of telling story and narrative. Um, and of course, you can see it in different ways. Like you've got Bollywood, and then you've got, like our, oh my gosh, what a telenovelas. Like different cultures do storytelling in different ways, and so in our Western space, we forget that we kind of have lost the edge because we all tell stories in the same, format. And so we kind of have to find an edge when it comes to the Christian story, which I'm like, we kind of can't because they're telling our story. Um, and so now we're trying to tell our story to a group of people they know where the clinches are, they know where the drops are, they know that. So for me, I think we have to just own it and realize how lucky are we that our culture understands our storytelling rhetoric. Or flip it, what would it be to look at how other cultures tell stories, and actually see what's evoked in that emotion, and are we missing those things in our story, like all that kind of stuff. But one thing that I love, and whether the church is ready for the call of it, really, is that after every single wave of the technological revolution, so we're now saying that we're in the third wave of the technology revolution. After every wave, there was such an insurgence of art and creativity and stuff. So you have revolution and like Renaissance, and every single time it pulls and draws that in, that we forget that actually, like, when the system kind of brings more ways to explore and breaks the mold of how you can do storytelling and sharing, comes the insurgence of how do we actually make sense of this? How do we actually feel this? How do we see it, taste it, see it, draw it? And that is where our art community thrives. And so for me, the question is, are we ready to do that? We are right now at our digital revolution. We have, it's flipped, it's come forward. And I couldn't understand how I could be a person who was so passionate about the digital world while in my spare time, I'm sitting there with a crochet hook and a needle. And I'm deeply like tactile. I do tactile art. And how do those sit the same? And I was like, well, actually, because one begets the other, where if we are so informed with this technological space where technology can now change and shift, and the digital world has opened up stuff, and people are saying that AI is also a move of revolution, which I say no. It's just, for me, my belief is that it's all held in the digital revolution. It's the same thing. It's just how we are communicating and sharing. So for me, the question is, what are we going to do about it as spiritual beings, and particularly our creative spiritual beings? How are we going to help the world explore who they are and do that meaning making, and allow that to actually flourish? And hopefully, and the aim, at least for me, is to allow people to see who they are with the divine and see who they are with the sacred, and allow them to come to know who God is for them, and let them build that. So, and the challenge is, I don't think, is the church ready? I don't know. I think first we have to acknowledge the fact that the church is already telling a story in this world, and I don't think the church is ready to hear that it's not good. So,
Yeah. And I think another layer to that is that I think a lot of people, I'll use the phrase young people as well, because I think where quote unquote young people are now old enough. I know that's kind of but that they have been young people in the church long enough that they now understand that the church's broader meta narrative isn't always something that they want to identify with.
Oh,
The
yeah.
church's narrative, when it comes to art, has often not been one of empowerment and valuing
Oh, no.
voices, and so
It suppressed and
it's a really
destroyed other cultures.
yeah, and to then ask people to join in the church's
Oh, gosh.
you know taking part in that narrative. It's like, no, a lot of people just aren't interested, and rightfully so. And so then that conversation then becomes, well, how do we then reclaim our agency in taking part in the church's input into culture and narrative? Because if we
Absolutely.
don't, it's a massive missed opportunity.
Yes, yes. This is also going to highlight how I too can't remember philosophers' names or anything. So I feel like we're in good company. One of my favorite things of history is when, again, I cannot remember the artist either, but it was in Rome. I know that it was in Rome, and it was this moment. I don't know if people know that Mary used to be painted on the moon because she was the mother of Jesus. Now, Jesus being the light of the world, and the moon was also the light, but it was a lesser light. And so they would paint Mary on the moon as like, being that light space. But then all of a sudden they realized that the moon doesn't shed light at all. It actually reflects the light of the sun. And so this whole movement happened where the church was the one an artist came and painted Mary on the moon, but painted craters on the moon. And it was the first time where art actually evoked the fact that science has said that it's not a light source in itself. And the church excommunicated that artist and the scientist, which over many years of time, I'm sure they didn't rock up on a Sunday and be like, you're out. Like, it evoked a theological shift. It challenged things. And for me, like, how cool is that? Like, the church actually was the leading forefront of actually saying something really cool. But also, how bad is it that the church had so much power that they then could say, and you're wrong. I think I think the church isn't used to not being that final call anymore. So therefore, let's leverage what we're trying to share. We have a story, and it's a good story. And for me, if it's about the flourishing of all humanity, then we need to share that really loud, and let's do it in our art and creativity. Like, yeah.
And what better time to be able to share that with more people than ever before than the age we're in at the moment with digital media. Like, that's one of the things I think is I'm going to be really interested to see what happens in the next 10 years with what the discovery algorithm allows and encourages. Because there is a negative side in the sense that it can start to generate a feedback loop or an echo chamber for people that they keep getting fed the thing that they want. But the positive side of that, and there's all different, it's not to get into the weeds of it, but there's a lot of debate at the moment about Instagram's discovery algorithm. I think yesterday, at the time of recording, literally the CEO of Instagram, the guy that shows up on all Instagram's accounts videos, was talking about how there's now a button in your account that you can reset your discovery algorithm. If you've gone too deep into a rabbit hole and you don't like it anymore, you can hit reset.
Do you know TikTok can do that too? You just erase your cache. But I did it once by accident. It was the worst decision I've ever done. I realized I actually liked my algorithm hole. So, but yes.
Then you got to start again, right? But as creators, that's scary. Even for what we do with Filthy Hope, like, our audience has grown. The biggest growth that we have had is through the discovery algorithm just populating random people's feeds with our content. And so as creators, there's a really, really cool opportunity as creators, but also as followers, to impact culture in a way that has never been able to happen before. Because the things that we can create, we can populate online that just get disseminated to potentially thousands, millions of people. And a lot of the time, that's people that aren't expecting to see it. So you have that different impact, as well as people that are looking for it. So there's something really, really interesting that's going to happen in the next 10 years with that function, with that mechanic. Curious to see what happens there. Yeah.
I know. And I was going to say, I'm so glad that was what I was just about to share about those who are looking for it. I think that's the biggest thing that some people say digital worship is useless. Like, it's going to come to an end. And my comment to that is, you have no idea what we do. Like, digital worship is not just setting up a screen. It's bigger than that. It's more complex than that. It's and you just sound so terrible. I don't want to sound horrible, but I'm like, you actually just don't get it. Because what really
a lot of the time they just don't get it. Yeah.
Totally. But what really hit me was when this has happened multiple times. People have been on Twitch searching for Christian community or Bible. I'm like, and then they find myself and Odd Rev chit-chattering away just about random scripture or even, talking about sci-fi or gaming or whatever. And they come across and they're like, hey, can I ask you this question? Oh my gosh. It's like people are looking, going like, hey, God used to talk to me very clearly, but I haven't heard from God in about 2 years. What am I doing wrong?
Yeah,
I was
wow.
like, oh my gosh. I'm like, you've come to Twitch for this? Like,
Yeah.
just, and so for me, I sit there going, well, I need to be there. If people are
Mm.
searching here, whether it's the accidental algorithm drop-ins, which I love, they're fun, through to those who are actually seeking, it's like, we need to be there for them when they find, and not for the answers, but to allow for the exploration with them, to say,
Yeah.
welcome to the wrestle, welcome to the journey, we're here, let's chat. And I'm also, again, trying to find a sheet of paper that I wrote a quote down about this. Again, another amazing person I can't remember the name of, but he talks about the need of our digital place needs to be good for social flourishing. It needs to be critically aware. It needs to be socially sound and environmentally sustainable. And I just sat there and I was like, yes, yes, yes. And I think that's when it comes to what is this going to produce in the future. There's a place called roamcall.org, and it's particularly looking at AI ethics. And it puts up 6 points that we need to make sure are included in our ethics when we go forward with AI and stuff. And for me, that's the thing that I think we as the church / we as people who are passionate just about flourishing of humans and flourishing of, actually, I say humans, flourishing of all life,
Mm.
including the digital world. Like, we actually need to make sure we put in calls for like standardizing, data security, human rights violations and exploitations. That still happens in our digital space. We need to make sure that we are not devoid of thinking it's not here, because it is. So,
Yeah, and
yeah.
that's like a evidence of the fact that the internet is still like in its infancy and
I'm
is
older than the internet. Oh, actually,
yeah.
no, I'm not. Sorry. I'm older than Google. So I always love that. And people were like, what do you mean you're older than Google? I'm like, when I started primary school, we had Encyclopedia Britannica. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, like that was the encyclopedia digitized. Like, oh, that was cutting edge.
Yeah. Because that what that means is that like it's still in its infancy, but it's also like the fastest developing form of communication in human
Ever.
history, which means that we are still behind in how we
Yes.
understand and put legislature
Yeah.
around and guardrails. And so when we talk about, oh, the internet's this terrible thing, it will be the end of
We have
humanity.
no idea.
Only if it's because it's still in its infancy. We're still figuring this thing out, and that means that, like, I've said this quote before on the podcast, but and I don't know if it's if it's a real quote or not, but like, no, it's
Yeah.
from Johann Hari, who's an amazing
Oh, yes.
writer and speaker, from his book Stolen Focus, which I highly recommend to everyone. As a really important read. But he
Nice.
talks about this, and I don't think it was even him. I think he's just referencing a famous saying that the axe as a tool existed for hundreds of thousands of years before anyone thought to put a handle on it. And I think we're at the point now where the
Oh, I love
internet
that.
is an axe without a
Yes.
handle yet. And
We
it's
need
the
a
same with
handle.
AI. We talk about AI as if it's the harbinger of doom that's going to destroy humanity. Yeah, if we don't figure out how to put a handle on it.
Oh,
But I think
and
we will,
also,
and that's the exciting opportunity that we're in. Is like we have
100%.
this amazing tool that has so much potential, and
Bring on the
as
handle.
followers, we actually have the opportunity to be at the forefront of that and the cutting edge of how we use this to drive culture.
And I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
I think to myself, sorry, just to flip on that, I don't know if you have done the Phyllis Tickle rummage sale theology. Again, I don't mind the fact that this is the one person who I remember. She talks about how every 500 years, spirituality and faith throw all their thoughts and stuff in on itself, and it becomes a rummage sale. And what we then pull out of that is what shapes our theology for the next 500 years. that we're on a 500-year fold again. Right now with the digital revolution happening, right now with this, I sit here and I go, oh my goodness, one, how exciting to be alive. What a privilege it is to be alive at the moment. And three, oh my goodness, what am I going to do about it? Like, how do I actually contribute to this in a positive way? And I'm excited too, because like, how cool would it be to actually be a part of that shaping for the next 500 years? And for me, that's the eternal lifeness that we have. We have that responsibility because we bring about eternity. We are eternal. And the fact that we're on a fold, that's scary and very cool all at the same time. But yeah.
Well, that's probably a perfect spot to pull the boat into shore. If people want to continue this conversation with us, where can people find you online if they want to continue this chat with you?
Yes, so you can find me at pastoralhare.com, and that is spelled like pastoral care, but without a C, it's an H. And you can find out and ask me why that's my handle at another stage, because there are 4 different rabbit holes why. And you can find me there. Otherwise, pretty much on all socials, I'm Pastoral Hare. So, yeah.
Cool.
Look me up, find me, add me, and come hang out in Sonderverse. So.
Yeah. I've been on a couple of times. It's a blast. If people haven't checked that out already, go and do it. And if people want to contact us, obviously, filthyhopepod@gmail.com, as always, and join our Facebook group as well. I'm sure there'll be plenty of chat about this episode by the time this comes out as well. So come join us there. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate your time and being so generous.
Thanks for inviting me to come on. It's been great. And I love a good opportunity to chat all rabbit holes that I wander down. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. And thanks to our listeners. We'll see you guys next week. Have a good one.
This is a prayer for the people who want to give up, who have been hurt beyond repair and cannot bear to see your face in anything. Find peace in letting go of the guilt that is in yours, and find hope in understanding. Life is not a game you have to win. Forgiveness overwhelming, salvation not deserving. You are loved by something beyond, someone beyond understanding. Drink deep and taste the